All set.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, September 28th, 2021 work session for the Town of Newcastle Town Board. If I can get a motion from somebody, please.
Move to open the work session.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. We are starting off with the FGIS form-based code, as most of us know. Jill or Sabrina?
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, prior to tonight's meeting, the board had received a draft copy of the introduction for your review. Or before I start, let me just introduce Bonnie Von Olson. She's online. She's representing the consultant team tonight. Sorry about that, Bonnie. We have been working very diligently to try and get you the completed sections. For your packet on Friday, you received the introduction as well as a packet of pages, not the document in its entirety, but red lines where changes have been made based on the public comment process and the work session. In addition, this evening, you received a memo from Bonnie to me regarding additional comments that we asked them to re-emphasize were complete or where changes needed to be made, were made, as well as really verifying. There was a whole slew of comments in this memo dated September 28th. There's 10 points that the consultant team reiterated response to. I'm not going to go through all 10 of those points. There is an 11th comment which lists a whole bunch of comments that the public and others claimed were not complete. The consultant team went back and revisited and confirmed that in their professional opinion, those comments are adequate and complete. So these are the documents you have before you tonight. I'd like to ask you if you have any comments or feedback regarding this information before you tonight. And then we can talk about on Thursday. I'd also like to note that this afternoon, myself, Ed Phillips, and Jennifer Gray had a conversation with Dr. Ackerman and the Central School District's counsel, Adam Starlow. And we heard from them some of their concerns and comments, and are looking to improve processes for information sharing. And we also assured the school district that as part of adoption of the form-based zoning district, the form-based code, that it requires that the development department track the development that occurs under this zoning code. The number of bedrooms, the projected number of students from each development, that we will for the first time have a clear tracking system. And one of the things that we discussed was creating a process whereby my office could share information with the school district, and they could in turn share their information with us. So we could really keep tabs on where we sit in relation to capacity within the schools and the student enrollment. And I'm going to open it up to you folks for any questions or comments you may have regarding the information you received. And again, apologies for submitting the memo to you tonight.
Well, at least in terms of the memo, I'll certainly read through it because we received it this evening and have comments. If we do, we can share that with you offline and prior to our next meeting.
Okay.
Anybody want to share anything?
Does anyone have comments? Okay. Sabrina, are we expecting more red line changes, or is this it?
I believe that there will be some soft redlining that will occur between today and the document you will receive for consideration on Thursday. You know, for example, today's conversation with the school district, you don't have any changes before you right now, but there is language in the FGIS that we will change, particularly in regards to thresholds, to make sure that we can capture the conversation today.
Okay. So obviously, I reiterate what Jeremy just said. We just received the Kinley
Sure.
memo, so nobody's had a chance to read it, and certainly not to digest it. So that we need to do. And I see a few of the things that I brought up last week are in here basically saying they're not going to be provided. I just saw that upon a very brief read, but I need to study that a little more.
Absolutely.
Okay, since no one else has comments, then I guess I'll just go. So I had a few issues when I was reading the red line. And if we're being asked, according to the current calendar, to be voting on this on Thursday, there are still, hold on, I'm sorry, wait, this is my husband. Okay, no, good. There's still a few things that I'm troubled with. So the first is, just in the introduction, it says, and I'm quoting, speculative comments or assertions that are not supported by reasonable observations or data need no response. Now, that was with regard to, questions from residents, but I would say that should not apply to answers. So I would like to ask Bonnie to go back through this. There are a lot of assertions that are not supported by observations or data, and I'd like you to go through that. I did provide some of those, not every one, but there's still a number of things that were not answered and have no backup. They're just statements saying this is not going to happen without any actual data supporting that. Then also in the introduction, section 1.4, where it talks about the new direction and the secret process. I think this is disingenuous and the whole thing needs to be deleted, or the scope of the document and the secret study area have to be modified to only include this North Greeley area. So that's that. What did I write here? 2A on page 49. I wrote delete. Oh, yes, delete a lot of this because it can be expanded. This is only talking about how it's only being put into North Greeley, the small area for the form-based code, yet the FGIS, again, covers the entire area. So I would argue that this whole section needs to be, again, deleted, or the FGIS has to be limited solely to North Greeley area. And again, and Lori's pointed this out before as well, a lot of comments in this document, and I'm going to say, this is just a few of them, A42, A51, A65, A104, A121, H33. Those are all saying it's only applying to North Greeley. That all needs to come out because we know full well that that's not going to happen, as we can tell by response A103 that now added the word initially, saying it will initially be applied to North Greeley, which, as a lawyer, when I read that, leads me to say, well, that means that more will be coming. So if the intention, by the addition of that word, seems clear that this will be expanded to more than North Greeley, then this document, again, either has to take out all references that are limiting things to North Greeley, or the document itself needs to be limited to North Greeley. This is a huge problem I have with this document.
So Lisa,
Yeah.
if I may, because I hear what you're saying, and it was this board's direction to make references to North Greeley when we were, as a first phase or initially, or as the only area to be rezoned in relation to timing. And specifically, if you read the response to A103, it's in reference to timing, additional time.
Yes, that wasn't actually one of the ones I referenced, but yes, you're right, it does.
I mean, so we have been very thorough, or at least I feel we've been thorough. Ed Phillips went through the document, and I went through the document, and Bonnie's gone through the document to ensure that all references to North Greeley were in relation to timing and not used as an excuse as limiting impacts.
Okay, it's not. I saw some of those references where it was related to timing, and I get that, but it's also others saying, well, it's not going to have a big impact on schools because it's only North Greeley, and we'll consult with the school district later on. If the purpose of a generic environmental impact statement is to study the environmental impacts on the whole study area, it is a cop-out to just say, oh, but it's only going to be applied to North Greeley, so we'll worry about the rest later. That is not the point of a generic environmental impact statement. It's to study the whole study area. So I will reiterate again, that's the same thing, that this document either needs to only apply to North Greeley, in which case this analysis with that qualifier makes sense, or we need to make sure that it is fulsome and that when we are asked to say that this is complete and eventually that there are no adverse impacts that can't be mitigated, I can't have something that's saying, oh, but it only applies to North Greeley, don't worry about the rest, because that's not what we're being asked to opine on here. This is covering the whole 72 acres. So then in response A3, I would argue that goal 1, where it says this was met, this does not preserve.
Just tell us the page if you have it.
I don't have the page. I mean, that one happens to be page 53, but then I stopped doing that later on in my comments. But it's response A3. I would say
Starts on
that,
page 51 of the red line.
but this is, I think, 53. Goal 1 does not preserve, or it may not be on this, it's what I was looking at on the computer. Does not preserve the bucolic nature of the hamlet, I would argue, by putting up 4-story buildings. So I would say that is not met. And goal 7, actually, it repeats the answer to goal 6. That's a mistake. It doesn't answer actually the question. It just, it was copied and pasted. So you want to look at that because that's just wrong.
7, right, where it's referring to preservation, protection of historic resources, but the question is about transportation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then, it also says that the following goals, goal 8, 9, 11, were not addressed, but actually they are addressed, they're just not addressed successfully. So 8, goal 8, adequate transportation for special needs population, and 9, alleviating traffic congestion. Those goals are addressed, it's just that they're not mitigated. So just because there's a negative implication does not mean they're not addressed. This is not supposed to be solving for only good things. If there are negatives to this, we need to know those. This is supposed to be an objective document that's not solving for something. It's supposed to give us objective facts so we can make those decisions. Again, goal 12, 28, 27, 28, if it's only applying to North Greeley again, then this is not applicable. Okay, I'm repeating North Greeley here. In A71, when we've been talking about this recently, you said parking lots won't fit behind the buildings. But then A71, the answer to that says, oh, well, you're going to put it behind the buildings so the sight lines will be mitigated and you won't see anything. But you said that they won't fit behind the buildings, so I don't understand how that is appropriately answered here. Again, in A103, the word initially was added, which is proof that the FBC will be expanded throughout the hamlet, which is why this should only be applying to North Greeley if that is actually the intent. A111, I wrote what is intended and what is written are two different things. You can't assume what future boards will do. Retail on the ground floor should not be exempted except by a variance. H33, it says, this is another one, and this is Sabrina where it was talking about timing. But it says the development department will coordinate with the CCSD regarding development. That to me means nothing, because if the form-based code is adopted, that's development as of right. You can't stop it and say, oops, our schools are getting too congested, don't build this building. We're now saying they can develop as of right. So just because we're going to coordinate with CCSD is not actually answering what that environmental issue is. It's just punting something down the road, which to me is not the point of this document. The point of this document was to study all the environmental impacts, not to just punt things down the road for future boards to have to clean up the nightmare. And we also need, as I mentioned last time, updated numbers for the schools reflecting the increased school children in town since COVID. We've had a lot of new families, a ton of new kids in town, so we need to make sure those numbers are updated, and just relying on what the CCSD gave you months ago, to me, is not sufficient. I want to make sure that's updated. Also, in H49, this lovely chart was added about the Mamaroneck schools. I'm imagining presumably so the consultants could say it's a multiplier used for a decent school district. The problem is that that actually ignored the reality of what actually happened in Mamaroneck, where there is overcrowding due to increased enrollment, which has caused them to have to break the tax cap, and there are articles about this that I've seen recently in the paper. So I think that is not a very good example to use. You would have been better off maybe looking at the number of school children in multifamily developments who actually live in Newcastle. And I think, for instance, there's an estimate that there are 18 children living on North Greeley in the rezoned area, but I believe that's significantly less than the 97 who actually live there now. So I would say that it puts some of this analysis, it makes it pretty suspect that you're not actually using numbers of people that I could go out and count. Again, people also move here for our school system, unlike comparisons to Mamaroneck and White Plains that are in this document. Again, as I'm in H49. They are not arguably moving to Mamaroneck or White Plains for their school system, but people do not live here. As I've said before, people are not moving here for the nightlife. They're moving here for our schools. So our multiplier should be greater than what's being used in these schools. It has to be based on sort of the facts that exist here. Also, I would love to see a list of the questions to which this red line is relating, because I know a lot of my questions were not answered, and I'm recalling, I didn't go back and watch all the videos, but a lot of residents had a lot of legitimate questions and concerns, and just looking at the red line, I didn't see that they were all answered. So I'd love to see the list of questions that this red line is purportedly answering. Okay, then I still don't see a financial or tax analysis that we discussed at length last week. I didn't see any of my requested information from Res Group regarding the developers they spoke with, or answers to my legitimate questions about why the return threshold was changed. It should be 6%. The justification that Res Group gave made no sense, and I would like it clarified. I do want to say, though, I wrote that obviously before I saw this memo that Sabrina gave us tonight, and I see that is talking about developers, so I need to look at that. But I can tell you that first answer, that they don't want people to basically bully them, or be the developers don't want to lose the ability to bid for projects in the past, so we need to keep who they spoke to confidential. To me, we're paying a lot of money for this. I want to know who you spoke to. You don't have to tell me what their specific answers were, but I'd like to know the developers that were spoken to. I still don't see how the parking toolbox will be utilized, and where the proposed other lots that are a mile away that developers can shuttle people to and from are supposed to go. That wasn't answered. There are not a lot of vacant lots in town. And I think residents would be pretty upset if they thought their neighbor could sell their property and rezone it because there's no other place to put a parking lot. And again, we need to do a more complete look at the impacts on the school system, traffic, parking, taxes, and financial analysis before, in my opinion, this document can come close to being complete. That's all I got. I have this all written down if you want me to send it to you.
Yeah, I think you should. It would be helpful. Thank you.
Indeed, it was a little hard to follow. It was impossible to follow along with.
Oh, because I talked fast?
Okay.
Sorry.
Sabrina, anything else you want to share? Or should I open it up to the public? Or is there anything else you?
I'm done for this evening. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the information you received. Bonnie's here as well to clarify anything that you need. It's really up to your pleasure.
Okay, let's start off and get the ball rolling. Does anyone
Wait,
here?
hang on before you
Yeah,
do that.
go ahead.
Just, so all these things I brought up, are these going to be addressed, or am I just talking?
No, if you send that to us, Bonnie, Lisa, Bonnie and I will go through it, and we will compare it to what we have already responded to. And if there's new issues, we will look at them.
Okay, but the biggest issues are things that are actually missing, like there's no tax analysis, there's no financial analysis, the CCSD needs to be looked at again, issues on parking, traffic. It doesn't make sense what's in this document. It doesn't actually work in our town. There are a lot of conclusory statements, so it does need to be looked at. And the red line that we were given, these pages were insufficient, which is why I asked if there was more coming that I didn't know about. But I will send this to you like I did last week.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to step up and share anything?
Good evening. Scott Levine, 149 King Street. I've got two comments tonight. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. The first of the comments is not attributed to me. It should be attributed to Ben Herman, who can't be here tonight. He's physically away. So I'm going to read his comment, just if you could make the minutes reflect that it's me reading his comments. And I'll tell you when I switch from his comments to my comments. So, Ben Herman, there are a number of deficient areas in the FGEIS, as I've noted at meetings over the past several weeks. I will limit my comments this evening to two topics. This does not mean that the other areas are complete. Frankly, I did not have time to review the entire document. Topic one, so he's got two topics. The first is three-story analysis, and the second is on taxes. So the three-story analysis. The financial feasibility analysis for 3 stories continues to be inadequate and incomplete, rendering the FGEIS inadequate and incomplete. As I noted in already submitted comments, Res Group continues to utilize inappropriate and inaccurate rent levels for its projections for new construction of residential and retail properties. Those rent levels are understated both relative to market conditions and actual observed rents in their own data sets, utilizing only $3.80 per square foot rather than observed new construction rents at 91 Bedford and 39 Washington, averaging $4 and $4.75 per square foot respectively. In terms of target returns, Res Group said on 9/14/21 that the 6.5% return threshold reflected higher project approval risk in Chappaqua, but the form-based code eliminates project approval risk, providing further support that the threshold should be 6%. Their justification for 6.5% on 9/14/21 is wholly subjective and not based on fact. It does not make logical sense given the easing of approval standards. The 6.5% they supposedly claim is needed is based on discussions with developers, an incomplete, biased, and subjective analysis in itself, not based on actual data, nor a range of opinions from various market participants, such as commercial property appraisers and lenders financing such projects. In the current FGEIS draft, the consultants have denied Councilmember Katz's request for their sources. The consultants, rather than performing an objective analysis at any point, have from the start clearly had the predetermined objective of showing that 3 stories is purportedly not feasible. In addition to the issues just mentioned, I remind you that their initial modeled report included in the DGEIS used residential rents that are 23% below what they are currently in the FGEIS. 23% since the initial report was done. Market rents have not increased 23% since that initial report was done. They wrongly understated rents to support a predetermined outcome in the DGEIS and continue to do the same in their updated feasibility report for the FGEIS, rendering it inadequate and incomplete. Okay, that was topic 1, so this is Ben's topic 2, taxes. There is a complete lack of fiscal analysis for the town, yet $23,000 extra was spent in a change order approved by the town board majority this past June for the consultants to determine developer profits for the FGEIS. Statements in the FGEIS that it's not possible to project tax revenue and costs are simply untrue and render the document inadequate and incomplete. If a hypothetical project value can be analyzed for profitability purposes, then you also have a value for tax assessment purposes. You've projected the amount of residential space, retail space, etc. on each block for purposes of making other determinations. yet have chosen not to consider the tax revenue. The town board cannot consider the FGEIS complete with a non-answer to the extremely important question of what property tax revenue and cost impacts will result from this FBC plan. Thank you for your consideration of my input this evening. Okay, so that's for Ben. I'll go on to mine. Scott Levine of the 149 King Street Townhomes. One of the most difficult aspects of this process is that everyone seems to find it hard to understand the perspectives of people who are, so to speak, on the other side. So I wanted to just share with you one reason why it feels, using the example of the residents of the 149 King Street Townhomes, that the community is being treated disrespectfully in this process. On November 24th, 2020, the town board held a work session where the agenda was to discuss each of a series of what former Supervisor Poole termed buckets of issues relating to the form-based code. One of these buckets was our little corner of Chappaqua, the 149 King Street neighborhood of 19 townhomes. The reason we're an issue is because the form-based code would incentivize out-of-scale building and multi-story parking garages directly next door, in our backyard, figuratively speaking. 0-foot side setback, 0 rear setback, no side or rear design standards, and virtually no recourse to our town's planning board of volunteer residents to balance my neighbor's interests with developers' interests, as has been the case in Newcastle for nearly a century, and as will remain the case everywhere else in town. At that meeting, Councilmember Levin announced that she had taken on the task of undertaking research into and speaking with planners about how form-based codes in Ithaca in Tompkins County and in the town of Malta in Saratoga County deal with difficult adjacencies between out-of-scale form-based code development and pre-existing residential neighborhoods, specifically with respect to the 149 King townhomes issue in Chappaqua. She announced that those form-based codes include a vegetated buffer requirement, and she proposed that one be included in Chappaqua prospective form-based code to, quote, protect the quality of life at the 149 King Street townhomes, which is generally acknowledged the contemplated action would harm. So, shortly after this, my neighbors did their research into the buffer zone requirements and learned that shrubs, understory trees, and shade trees, all of different sizes, are required to screen the out-of-scale development, as well as other requirements. Councilmember Levin subsequently wrote to the president of the 149 King Street Homeowners Association, quoting, "The transitional buffer is the mechanism in which to create appropriate space between the protected neighborhood and another development. In the Malta example, there was a setback, transitional buffer established to protect the neighborhood. The abutting building did not block views or cast shadows on the neighborhood. I hope this helps," end quote. Again, that meeting was in November of 2020, nearly a year ago. Now, in September of 2021, we learned that the revised iteration of the form-based code contains no such transitional buffer mechanism, which would balance my neighbor's interests with developers' interests. Instead, there is a proposed new direction which directly impacts some of the 149 King townhomes, but not others. And there is most recently a reduction of the proposed new number of stories on the east side of North Greeley Avenue, which was never discussed with the residents of the neighborhood and does not address the issues that the new form-based code buildings will be much taller than existing buildings, will be right up to the property line with no setback, much closer than either the existing buildings or the drawings shown in the DGEIS, which purport to disclose the visual impacts. The 149 King Street townhomes are not afforded any sort of vegetated buffer, which the draft form-based code requires for the other residential neighborhoods adjacent to the form-based district. There has never been any public discussion of why the neighborhood clause buffer zone that Councilmember Levin proposed was not incorporated. So, to sum up, my neighbors trusted you for the better part of a year to make good on this commitment that relates directly to the value of their homes, their main asset in life, and only now at this very late stage, we learn that you do not intend to make good on this commitment. They feel that you and those working on your behalf have strung them along, only to leave them in the lurch. When someone publicly says one thing and then proceeds to not do what they said they'd do, it's damaging to a relationship because it cuts to credibility. It leaves the community in the position of having no choice but to disregard your verbal pronouncements, whether about impacts on schools, traffic, taxes, air quality, etc., and focus exclusively on your actions and their consequences. You've been asked about this specific issue since early 2020, and you and those acting on your behalf have evaded the question. If you treated a developer this way, I think he or she would rightfully feel a bit out-prioritized, disrespected, and mistreated. Thank you for listening.
So I'd like to address your comment, Scott, and I'd first want to make sure that I don't think I've ever evaded any comments, and especially as it relates to this buffer clause, my understanding of how our process works is we go through the finding statement, we establish the FGIS, and next week or 2 weeks from now, we're doing a workshop on the actual legislation, which would be the appropriate time to address this. And you can even ask Sabrina. Sabrina and I have had multiple conversations about this. I'm not shy about it at all. I certainly am not here to keep people in a lurch, and I certainly do not burn bridges. So you certainly have my commitment as to trying to address these issues, because I think it was a fabulous idea, because in the town of Malta, when I spoke to the director of planning there, she specifically cited this because there was a townhouse community actually very similar to 149 Kick Street. So again, please don't jump 5 steps ahead of us and just assume that I'm not doing my job here. I am. And I assure you that it'll be addressed. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We didn't have that information before now, so thank you very much.
And just to be clear, thank you as well, just understand, and I'm sure you do, and sometimes there's some confusion, the FGIS is not the actual code. No. So we're gonna still work through that code, that zoning legislation.
That's fine. And just something that Lauren said quickly. I didn't mean that you personally have evaded the question. I guess a better way to put it, the question has been raised and hasn't been answered.
Well, Scott, again, I'm not gonna put you on the spot here, but how your tone and your style and the way you've confronted me about these issues certainly suggests that. And perhaps it's a passive-aggressive way, but it does. And so I just want to say for the record that we are addressing these issues. We are going to workshop the legislation. We are going to make sure that it is appropriate for our hamlet. And so I just want to assure you, so that I don't have to constantly be up here and have to defend myself every time my credibility has to come into question.
Okay, again,
Okay.
that discussion was in November of last year. It's 10 months later, and what you've just said is the first we've heard anything about it. But I respect you and thank you.
Thank you. Next person want to come up, please?
Hi, Roger Klepper, Pond Hill Road in Chappaqua. I think I'll probably make this relatively brief. From the start, I've had significant concerns with the process, and okay, maybe it won't be so brief. I think one of the things initially, and I know there's a lot of discussion regarding the topic of the 72 acres, which is now, I guess, being considered under the FGIS, and you're on the cusp of filing that, and subsequently the finding statement. And I'll go way, way, way back to the very, very beginning of this process, where, when the DGEIS came out, and there were those pictures, right, and of those renderings, and people in the community, all of a sudden we're running around saying, look what the town board is doing to your town. This is what they're putting there. This is what is going to be built. And, I think the reaction to that was very, very defensive, was to say, oh, that's probably not going to happen, to try and diminish the potential for those 72 acres and in some ways marginalize the 72 acres. And, and I think I spoke about this at the very, very beginning, and to some extent it fell on deaf ears, from the very beginning, in that I said, look, you cannot marginalize the 72 acres. We only have one EIS, and that's what it's for. And if you're not assessing your answer should have been, instead of saying, oh, that's probably not going to happen, you should have said, yes, we understand. This might be alarming to see, but since we can't predict what will happen or what won't happen or what part of this will happen and what part of it will not, we have to assess all of this. And you as a community have to be comfortable with all of this. And that should have been the message from the beginning, to be in order to file, to complete this FGIS, to file the finding statement, the community had to be comfortable with all of this. And that's the duty from the beginning. And it's always been this process of marginalizing the impact of that 72 acres, then with a new direction to limit to 6, all of a sudden it was deflecting away from the 72 acres. So to some extent the process has been to sort of, and then you say, well, in the future, we're still going to file this finding statement for the full 72. I believe the plan is to file the finding statement for the full 72 acres. I mean, every once in a while there's tangential references to, we haven't said exactly what we're going to do, which is kind of consistent with what, once again, the process is. We have to kind of infer from body language. There is no transparency. If there is any potential that the finding statement won't be for this full 72 acres, it certainly hasn't been discussed in any of these venues. There has been no interaction and no indication of that. So, I guess when I'm done, it would be helpful to know if that is a possibility. Because when we're done with this, we're done with an EIS process. Like, you can say that in the future, before this gets implemented, that before some future town board implements this on 72 acres, that, you'll have work sessions. Yeah, those are work sessions. It's not an environmental impact study. An environmental impact study is when you're supposed to determine, and I'll use the words of what they say in the finding statement, that this minimizes the environmental impact. That is what you're saying in the finding statement. You're saying it's approvable. Now, excuse me, I'm not so good at reading these things on my phone. So, thinking about that, now I have to unlock my phone. In the most recent red line, you wrote, initially limiting the rezoning to, this is not going to be easy for me. Limiting the rezoning to North Greeley corridor will provide additional time for the town to evaluate impacts of increased density and population within the Chappaqua Hamlet. That's an environmental impact study. So it's not just some check the box, it's a real process to evaluate the impact of the density and the population. So if you file that finding statement based on those words, that finding statement would be a lie. It would be an untruthful assessment of your opinion of the 72 acres in this town. So I don't understand how you can do that. You have some faith that outside of an environmental impact study, we're going to have the discipline and the structure to go through this and come up with that assessment. Your finding statement has to be consistent with what you think is appropriate for the town right now. And that's it. I mean, I don't know if that's possible. It would be great to hear some transparency to see if that's possible. But I mean, that is the end point of this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger, I will transparently say, and I don't know if you were here when I spoke earlier, I agree with you 100%. I think there are many, 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 many instances in this document where it just punts environmental analysis down the road, saying we are initially only applying it to North Greeley. So that leads me to say again, either this FDIS has to be limited solely to North Greeley, or there needs to be significantly more financial, environmental analysis done to cover the entire 72-acre hamlet, because we know, and I actually caught that initially word that was added in there too, because we know that it will be used in the entire 72-acre hamlet. So if the environmental analysis has not been done, that means that we have a very incomplete document, unless it's going to be completely limited to North Greeley. So I share the exact same concerns with you.
Roger, I'll just add to your point about initially and Lisa's as well. I think that's something that Sabrina and Ed should discuss and help for clarity as to what is meant by that, because it does seem to insinuate that there is, I don't want to use the term the agreement, but the assumption that it will absolutely happen and we are moving on to the next stage of the entire 72 acres for a form-based code. So I understand your concern and understand the language there is confusing.
See,
But
thank
even if
you.
I'm-
I'm less concerned about the word initially.
Well,
'cause
I think it's relative.
I know.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just. I'll explain. I'm less concerned about the word initially. I mean, I guess the concern is that implies some intent.
Correct.
So even getting rid of the word initially, the description of the process, that after you're closing the finding statement, you are going to evaluate the impact of population, density and population. I mean, that's everything. That's, whether we want 4 stories, whether, the traffic, how many people, that's all the stuff that's in the environmental impact statement. So you're closing the environmental impact statement, but afterwards you're going to evaluate that for the 72 acres? I don't understand. I mean, it's.
Can you refer to a comment that you're speaking to?
Sure.
Sabrina, I think the comments that I indicated earlier with all of those different ones that I will be sending you actually covered a lot of what
I know,
he's
it's really,
saying.
but I'd like to reference and look at what he's talking about now.
It is response A103. I don't have any further reference to that.
Would you
Thank
like
you.
me to read it?
So the concern, just to add on to that, is, and I agree, even if you take out the word initially to me is a clear indication of intent. However, even if that word is deleted, if the FDEIS is being studied and adopted for the entire 72 acres, even if the word initially does not exist there, it can still be utilized on the entire 72 acres. So to not have appropriate financial and environmental analysis done for the entire 72 acres makes this document completely insufficient with respect to that area.
I mean, the findings means, you say, okay, well, what difference does it make if you do this? Some town board in the future, we're supposed to get comfortable with the fact that there's going to be, engagement sessions. Yeah, but what there's not going to be is an environmental impact, assessment.
The way
When you do that, when you finish it, that has teeth. When you finish it now means you do not, there is no burden to do that. And, there's just, okay, you could say there's goodwill of the board to assess things, but there's reasons why we have state requirements that mandate these things, because when you do something of a magnitude that they say, oh, the goodwill of boards to act on people's behalf is not enough. We need a structured process that that assess the impacts of population density
So-
and all of those things. And that's what the EIS, the secret process is.
Right, and so I want to add something here, because I think it is essential to read the comment A103. The comment is talking about, I don't want to summarize it, it's written here. The response is in direct response to the comment. And yes, I think that you raise a good point in the sense of evaluating impacts of increased density. What this should say is that because the town board has selected to apply the zoning to the North Greeley area, we will be able to track the amount of development that occurs, the number of bedroom units that are built, the number of school children generated, so we can determine and weigh that in relation to the environmental analysis conducted for the entire studying area. If we are way off, a supplemental EIS may need to be considered before any future town board decides that they may want to rezone other areas that were considered in this environmental impact analysis. It's not meant to say that we now need to go back and do an assessment.
Why are we doing this? I mean, we're doing 6 acres on North Greeley. I mean, we're tying ourselves in knots, bending over backwards to try and end up with a finding statement for 72 acres. It's, if at the end of, I mean, we can change the wording, but in substance, at some point, you're going to have to complete what you're not completing now, which is the environmental impact statement for the full 72 acres. So why pretend that we're finishing it now when we're just not?
Right, I think we've talked about this issue a number of times, and this example, and the language hopefully reflects what I think is an example of a way that the town board can use its power to map the zoning to specific areas over time.
But it doesn't, because if the wrong town board is elected, in January, they can adopt this for the entire 72 acres. So there will be no further analysis done, and the finding statement that's adopted based on this FGEIS will stand with the insufficient analysis that's in here right now for the entire 72 acres. That's the issue. This should only apply to North Greeley. If that's the intent, is to study everything down the line, then that's what should happen. It should be studied down the line before anything can be implemented. We all know full well that if this is adopted, it can be implemented throughout the entire 72 acres with one meeting.
I think it can be used as a resource. for
And
a
it can be
town board.
adopted.
Can I finish my statement? You were allowed to finish yours. It can be used as a resource by a future town board to consider where they might want to apply a form-based code zoning.
I mean,
Let me just-
I think we've talked about this before. I mean, used as a resource, speaks to the benefit of the assessment process that we've been through, right? But that resource exists whether it's in the finding statement or not. You still have the benefit of all that, of the resource, of the knowledge, of all the information. It's just a question of whether you have to do an environmental impact or finish the environmental impact assessment. I mean, there's very, very different things.
Right, so, look, the town board decided quite some time ago that it was going to finish SECRA on the entire study area. That decision was made months ago, and the reasons for that decision were also announced at the time. Now, I understand that there is a difference of opinion as to whether certain analyses in the document are complete, and that's fine. But I would push back on the idea that the document is incomplete. The board, you've got your consultant telling you in the memo, in the red lines, in these work sessions, that in its opinion, the answers, like, for example, with respect to the tax analysis, are adequate and complete. Ultimately, it's your decision. whether or not to accept this draft. And that's something that we need to talk about, because right now it looks like we're on our last lap in terms of the process, and we're moving toward a resolution being on the agenda for Thursday to accept this document, this draft, as complete, subject to probably some additional changes that you'll see on Thursday, or you know, additional minor red lines. But it's our sense that the board there's a consensus on the board with respect to the drafts that you've been receiving. And I just want to confirm that, because Kinley Horn and Sabrina's department and our office will continue on that track and continue to finalize the document. I just want to make sure that, again, there's a consensus on the board for doing that.
Well, you made reference to way
Can I
back
get
when.
I just addressed the board. I'd like just,
Okay,
I'm sorry,
let's just
Ed.
finish that conversation.
I mean, you made reference to, they said there are reasons why they would continue for the full 72 acres. I think at one of the meetings I asked Jeremy, what are the reasons? I mean, you made reference to it. What are the reasons?
I'm not going to speak for the board and its reasons. Again, you know, that's been brought, look, I understand there's a difference of opinion on that.
No, I mean, no, that's an information. I mean, it's a request for information. I mean, you made reference to reasons for doing so. I've asked the board what the reasons are, and I've never really, I mean, my assertion was it was for matters of convenience and, you know, by, you know, sort of economics, saving money down the road, but I'm not, and maybe time and effort, and, you know, basically in substance convenience, but I'm not really sure beyond that what I've never really heard the answer. You made reference to the reasons, so I mean, it doesn't. I don't think you necessarily have to answer, but somebody. I mean, it was an important part of what you just said,
Look,
right?
it's not a question for me to answer,
I understand.
and I'd just like to gauge the board again on where we from here to tomorrow, Thursday night. We've got red lines. We've got the memo that you received from Kinley Horn. Again, I just want to confirm that we're on track, on pace for incorporating those red lines and finalizing the document.
My first comment before we even get there, Sabrina, I appreciate you providing that clarity to that issue that was raised by Roger. That aside, I am satisfied, and I do believe that it's sufficient and adequate, as you've referenced before, in terms of our standard and the quote-unquote hard look, and still remain ready to proceed. Again, I can't speak on behalf of anyone else, but I'm comfortable with where it's going and where it's been.
Yes, I appreciate that this exercise has been to review the entirety of the eligible areas of the commercial zones of the hamlet for this tool, for zoning change. And that to enable good decision-making not only now, but into the future, that having that document in place as a resource for that decision-making is the exercise here. And with that in mind, and with, I think, the depth that has been added to the document through the comment and response process, I am satisfied.
I think we're on the right track, and I think that, I know Sabrina, I give you and the consultants a lot of credit for working on this. I do want to answer your question, Roger. I mean, my personal response to your question about studying the 72 acres is, you know, I will say that my gut on this, as far as the form-based code goes, is, you know, if it actually works on North Greeley, if it does, there's a minute chance that it does. I think there's a huge chance it does. In fact, in the beginning of this process, I've always been in favor of rezoning the hamlet, because I live downtown, and I see that there's a lot of potential in making our town better and finding ways to improve the process. And for me, you know, I'm obviously not running this year, but for me and for future town boards, I would hope that, you know, if North Greeley gets redeveloped, that the future town board would really take a hard look at that before expanding the code and make sure that they're making the right decisions before expanding it. At the same time, completing this study is very valuable information for me, as well as all the stakeholders in the town. And I think that it's very eye-opening to see that even with the maximum build-out, we're not reaching out of capacity levels. So that's just my personal perspective of it, and perhaps, you know, you disagree with that, and that's fine. But I did want to address your question, Roger.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, it's hard for me to tell who's speaking, so I didn't intentionally mean to be looking away from you. I can't even tell who's talking. But it's a longer story.
I don't take things personally anymore.
Yeah. You need to have thicker skin than that up there.
And Roger, I'll follow up, and I didn't get a chance before, but I do believe it's appropriate that we study the whole 72 acres, because I do think that the whole 72-acre area, what's included and what's excluded in terms of the hamlet, but the area that's being studied certainly can be enhanced. It could certainly use revitalization, and I believe the tool and mechanism to do that is through this FGIS and future zoning. You know, I think that you also have to have the sort of practical reality that, well, I don't know where every municipality's zoning codes are and where they are in terms of their maximum build-out or not, whether New York City is built to the max, whether Scarsdale is built to the max, whether Pleasantville is built to the max. I think you have to weigh and examine the environmental impact. You have to understand what it is. But just because you can doesn't mean you will and doesn't mean you should. And we have to also be reasonable that just because a zoning is in place, just like everywhere else, we have 341 units now that could be rezoned. Pardon me, rephrase that, I misstated that. Rebuilt. 341 units that could be built now. And they haven't, in large part because of the code doesn't really facilitate it. But, you know, is the alternative, and this is really not a real question, just a statement, but to say, well, if we can get rid of the whole form-based code, but we'll allow and facilitate and expedite the building of 341 units. And I'm willing to bet there's a group of people who wouldn't want to see that either, even though it's permissible and doable under the code. So I think studying this is critical to making sure that the community is vibrant and the hamlet is successful going forward. I have no objection to it whatsoever. The environmental impact statement, I believe, is beyond adequate. And I recognize we're going to disagree, and some folks here will disagree, but I'm comfortable.
And honestly, I didn't plan to spend as much time up here as
That's all right. You said a
as
short.
I
You
am.
said a short question.
Exactly.
You never,
quick-
lead,
I
you
quick-
never
I-
lead with that.
I quickly retracted. Just speaking to a couple of things. One,
I didn't actually finish. They all got to talk about their consensus, and I didn't. So can I just say mine, or do you want to talk
can I
first?
just respond to Jeremy and,
Sure.
and Lauren real quick? Jeremy, first of all, I mean, I know we've gone back and forth, and it really frustrates me to say, you know, kind of marginalizing the potential for the full build out. You only have one environmental impact study. I think I began this with the directive to the community is, yeah, you know, this entire thing probably isn't going to happen. It may be conservative, but your mandate, what's mandated by the process is that you do this, because we only have an environmental impact study for the full build out. So if you somehow marginalize that, then you're not doing any environmental impact study, because you don't have a most likely scenario.
Just to be clear, I'm not objecting to the build out.
Okay, okay. So, and just Lauren, real quick, I don't want to take up much more time, but Lauren, to your point about North Greeley, I think I'm pretty bullish about North Greeley. I mean, there's a couple things about it. One, it doesn't have the elevation change. It's fairly self-contained. We know they're identifiable property owners that are probably, you know, going to develop their properties. There's a lot about that that's very, very controlled. So I think the concern that I have, and maybe a lot of people here would have, is that, you know, yes, North Greeley, I mean, people are comfortable with North Greeley for the most part, and that could go well, right? But, you know, to then say, okay, that's going to tell us something about the other stuff, which is crazy. I mean, the idiosyncratic, I've used this word many times, idiosyncratic nature of our downtown, the steep slopes, the lack of thoroughfare, the traffic, all of those things. It's away from North Greeley that the stuff gets really, really complicated. So, you know, while I appreciate the you know, what's happening in North Greeley, you know, in some ways to diminish the amount of work that needs to, and the assessment that needs to do with everything else, which is really, really complicated stuff. I mean, I think I've made it clear. That's where my concern lies.
Okay, so,
Lisa?
so my view on the consensus here is that I agree that getting this information and doing this process does provide valuable information to this town board and any future town board. That being said, if we're going to do an analysis of 72 acres, we have to actually do the analysis of 72 acres. And I don't think that this document gets us there. And I know I'm the only town board member who's had a significant number of comments, because I see so many inadequacies. And if we're going to study 72 acres, if you want this to relate to 72 acres, then we have to study it. We can't punt and say we're going to figure this out down the road. I also think I'm the only town board member who's had to deal with an environmental impact statement when we were doing Chappaqua Crossing. So I know the implications of that, and I know what it means to have a negative declaration and adopt a finding statement. And should not be taken lightly. And it's going to be taken lightly because this is an insufficient document with regard to the entire 72-acre hamlet. And just because, as Lori said and was quoted in the newspaper, it's a great document because so many people ask questions, that's great, but we don't have appropriate answers for those questions. And to me, that is the biggest issue with this document. If you want to study 72 acres, you have to actually study it. And if we're being asked to adopt a finding statement with respect to 72 acres, this damn well better cover every environmental impact with those 72 acres, which this document doesn't. It says we're studying it for North Greeley and you guys can figure it out down the road. That is not an appropriate environmental impact statement. So that is my biggest concern here. And then with regard to North Greeley, who is determining if it works? We have no benchmarks. Who is determining if it's appropriate? We're going to have to do a whole new analysis. So to me, this makes no sense. And if we want to study, you know, I'm outvoted to study the whole 72 acres, and I do believe it gives us information, but that information can be used even without adopting a form-based code for future developers. As they come in, they no longer have to pay for some of that analysis that the town has just paid for them. So we don't need to adopt a form-based code. We don't even need to adopt a finding statement based on this. We could just have an exercise, as incomplete as it is, to determine what needs to be done and environmental impacts on the 72 acres. But I firmly believe if we're going to study it, let it be studied in a fulsome manner, which I don't believe this is. And I would hope that, I had hoped throughout this process that other people would have had more comments and thoughts about this, but there weren't. But I remain incredibly concerned about this. And I think this board, in exercising its fiduciary duty to this town, really better know what the hell this means for financial impacts, for taxes, for traffic, for parking, for our schools, it's going to impact property values. We don't know any of that information with respect to this whole 72 acres. So if we're going to adopt a finding statement with respect to it, we need to know all of that, not just, oh, we'll figure it out later on. So that's my view on it.
Sabrina, I just follow up with you. I think let me rephrase that. It's not a fair characterization to say, we'll figure this out later on. That's not what this FGIS says at all. Certainly, Lisa has her opinions and her views, and it is what it is. But and I'm glad you did, and I wouldn't doubt that you would. Of course you did it. So that's not a fair characterization. I think you'd agree with that statement.
I do agree with that statement. There is analysis contained in the environmental review in totality. There's additional analysis that's appendicized to the FGEIS and contained in the responses of the FGEIS. There are thresholds that are attached to each of the sections that are summarized in the introduction that you received on Friday. Those thresholds are critical to establishing the limits of what will be examined when each application comes before the town for development within a form-based zone district.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Roger.
We also have some people online with their hands up.
All right, there's someone here, people here first, but thank you, Carrie.
Good evening, Warren Gottlieb, Chappaqua resident. I have read the draft FGIS comments and comment response subsections that have been released since August. I've also listened to all resident feedback to the extent that residents were even aware that this was really happening at the associated work sessions and purported engagement sessions. Additionally, I have read what purports to be a red line of all revisions to the draft FGEIS. I say purports because the base compare document in the red line is not identified, the one that was in the packet. I know that the town had paid for a time is of the essence draft of the FGIS and indicated it was received on July 8th. So I don't know if this is a cumulative black line or red line, but it just, it shows the current date of the document, the 24th, and then it doesn't indicate what the base document is. But I would ask if we could get maybe a cumulative of red line of the document. That would be great, because it seems like there are, it helps to know what the base document is.
Right. Bonnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but the base document is the version that's posted, and Sabrina, posted on the town website, and the red lines that were generated last week were off of that version, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's off that full version. Okay, thank you.
And that
very
full, just by way of explanation, that full version is simply all of the individual sections that we workshopped over the past month and a half, essentially bolted together into one document.
Okay, so it's only from that document going forward. It doesn't go back to anything else that was before that was published, correct?
Right.
Right.
Okay, I mean, I'm assuming there were prior versions to that not distributed to the public?
Well, the sections were in draft for some
Okay.
time before they were released,
Well,
correct?
To be clear, Ed, when you say they were in draft, something is not released to the public because it's a work in progress. Once it was completed, it was shared.
That's correct. As soon as the board saw it in a packet, the public received it at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. At the past several sessions, I have tried very hard in earnest to really focus on good process, meaningful engagement, and of course the substance around the draft FGEIS. Unfortunately, I mean, I am sitting here listening to this, and it sounds like, and I'm not a little concerned as to why we're even really having an engagement session, because it sounds like the 3 of the 4 town board members have already decided that the document is complete, or at least that's what I'm hearing. So I guess to some degree I'm wasting my breath up here, but for all of the people who down the road want to know what happened and who stood up, I'll be one of the people who stands up and goes through what I believe to be the deficiencies here. Before I do that, I do, and I've said this at each of the 3 prior times I've spoken, I believe 3 times. I have asked for a couple of things, basic things that happen as a predicate to these, quote, engagement sessions, and they don't seem to have happened, and I don't think they were really big asks. One was that please give residents and yourselves at least a week to review documents. I understand this week was only red line pages, but there is a base document, and if you're going to do a good read of a red line, you do refer to the base document. It's not just like it was 160 pages, and it's the documents are turgid. So that didn't happen. I don't know why, other than I don't just simply enjoy hearing myself speak. I actually was asking that because I thought that would be a valuable thing for the community and yourselves, but that just didn't happen. But I did get the message, and I want you to know I don't take it personally to me. I just understand that I'm one of many residents in this town, and you just felt like not giving that to them. I also, there were other people who wanted some more time to look at this. I know the Chappaqua Central School District was one of the interested agencies, and certainly if they were told they couldn't get a modest amount of time, what chance does the average resident get? I've also asked that when releasing these documents, please do a better job of alerting residents to their release, because not every resident knows how to go on Ecode 360. I've said this, till I'm blue in the face. But one thing I have noticed is that the town does a very good job in its newsletter of putting out a 20-point plus spin on the underlying documents in the e-newsletter that comes around. But somehow the documents that are underneath that, the original source, just doesn't ever seem to get that type of spotlight.
Warren, that newsletter's not vetted with the full town board.
Okay,
just so you
all
know.
right, sorry, I don't know who writes it.
I
Yeah.
write that letter, and I would disagree with your assessment, but I understand we're going to disagree.
Okay,
So
thank
go
you.
ahead, continue, thank you.
Meeting times and places for these purported engagement sessions also, they don't get they don't get the Klieg lights like other things. In any case, these were very modest. I thought they were pretty modest suggestions. I mean, I could really argue with them, but I guess I was naive. I thought that, basic standards of process, could you give us that? No. It's not lost on me. It's not lost on my fellow residents that we are here at the Performing Arts Center again. And again, we're all relegated to the role of extras and stage props, because what I'm about to give you, you've basically just told us you don't want to hear. So, I mean, we might as well call this the Ice-capades, because this is not an engagement session. You can list whatever you want in your FGIS as to what this is, but I'm speaking to the reader of this record at a future date. Those are just labels, okay? You could call this the Big Apple Circus, but that's not what, this is not a true, in my mind, the true engagement session. So, in any case, onward. The red line pages are consistent with what I've seen of the draft FGIS thus far. Specifically, the portions of the document released are, in my opinion, incomplete, contain inaccuracies and misleading statements, employ circular reasoning, and reflect intellectual dishonesty in a result-oriented approach instead of the hard look that SEEKR requires, and this is a non-illustrative list. The first one was red line response A3, which relates to, and I actually think this is one we've talked about this before, the comprehensive plan goals. And we're still, the red line pages still do not respond to those comments. I mean, you've added a few non-database, basically, summary sentences in there, but that's not what we were talking about at the prior engagement session. I know there was at least one town board member that shared my concern and about this, that expressed that concern, that there was no data behind all of these conclusions. And that type of omission, that's a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal. If you're not going to go back and do an analysis as to whether or not you're not even willing to take the time and demonstrate to the community that, in fact, what the proposed action is proposing actually lines up with the comprehensive plan. I mean, to me, that just says a lot of bad things about the document. You did, however, get to goal 9, which was, I believe, left out the first time, about traffic congestion. And you stated that the goal would not be addressed. That's not an accurate statement, okay? You just made traffic worse with the proposed action. It's not that you didn't try to make it better. You actually are acknowledging in there that traffic is going to get worse. And goal 9 of the comprehensive plan is completely, stands in complete contrast to that. So I don't know how, that's just not an accurate statement. Response B82, that still does not respond to the predicate comment for B82. That comment asked for, in part, illustrative examples be given of Westchester County municipalities that are similarly situated to a form-based code that has been implemented. The 6-sentence response to that lists Portchester, Mamaroneck, downtown New Rochelle, and Ossining. I think Yonkers has now been taken out as a comparable. Response B94 summarily dismisses comment 94, which comment challenges and rejects the notion that the form-based code reflect what the community wants for the study area. And, again, you've got circular statements, you've got, incomplete response. It's just circular reasoning. It's just, and there's no factual basis. F20 does not respond to the predicate comment, and, you've still got that problem in the document. Response F21 still does not respond to the predicate comment for F21. You're blowing it off, and the predicate comment asks that the traffic impacts that contemplate the traffic patterns that have occurred and continue relating to COVID-19 as they pertain to all streets leading to Bell Middle School be restudied. I mean, these are real concerns. And, you can get it. I mean, I'm just kind of, I am very, and I don't mean this in a way where I'm just trying to get what I want and I'm just going to say all these incendiary things. I can't believe some of the things I'm hearing tonight about what people think is complete in this document. I really can't. Response F31 in the red line, that blows off the comments to response F31 as heard in the engagement sessions. It just, again, we're talking about in that comment, it's basically it just remains wholly deficient. It underscores a major flaw with the form-based code in the associated 72 study acre area, which is that you're basically going in direct conflict with goal 9 of the comprehensive plan, which is alleviate traffic congestion. Response F32 blows off the engagement comments to response F32. The response purports to respond to 31 separate comments about traffic. These 31 comments all express deep concern about traffic, and there's no surprise because, again, goal number 9 of the comprehensive plan calls to alleviate traffic congestion. The response still makes no sense. It basically says we think traffic will go up 10% over the next number of years if we do nothing, so what's the harm in just doing the job for real and, ramming it up to 37% increase and then trying to figure out how we're going to get that number down. That's not what the comprehensive plan calls for. You shouldn't be first accelerating the growth of traffic and then coming back and saying, well, now we're going to mitigate it. No, that's not what you're doing. Response F35, again, that's another blow off. It's essentially the underlying response was non-responsive. It was talking about our seniors and drawing attention to the fact that basically you're asking them if they live downtown to walk a quarter of a mile, 5 city blocks to get to their personal vehicle. And it was expressing concern about the ability of seniors to live downtown and get to a supermarket without their car. And, last time the response before the red line was, quote, take the bus, basically. Now it's take the bus or, just take a hike. These are not complete responses. These are not complete responses. Response F36. There are no red line pages relating to deficient response F36. This response essentially blows off the request that a traffic impact study be updated, recognizing that it was done in September and October of 2019, pre-COVID, and as the downtown construction was being completed. We're all jumping up and down that this is complete. Is everybody living through the same times that I am? Instead, we're still, you've got the New York State DOT recommendation, that in essence says, don't worry about COVID, just look at what was normal before then. I know that the fact that you might get answers is inconvenient and may take you a longer time to complete this study, but that does not mean that the document is incomplete. It means that to make the document complete, you might have this take a bit longer and be more inconvenienced to get that done. And since you only get one EIS, this is it. Just blindly taking the DOT recommendation there. When has this town ever just accepted the bottom line, lowest safe harbor on anything. Well, I guess it's now. Who's ever watching this in the future, while you were living through these times, this is what was being done. Response F52. This response was totally unacceptable, and the red line didn't cure the deficiency. The underlying commenter simply was asking the following question, and it wasn't answered. Here's the question. Quote, will the FBC make my commute to NYC longer, or will it stay the same? Will it be easier or more difficult to park? Close quote. There was a single unsupported sentence saying there would be no significant impact on commute times, and the response made no mention whatsoever about additional time getting to and from the station with increased density downtown, both during and after the expected 15-year construction. I mean, there were a few things thrown into the red line, but that comment was never fully responded to. That's not like asking somebody, who played second base for the Brooklyn Dodgers. That's asking somebody, is this going to make it harder for me and longer for me to get to work? And am I going to spend less time with my family? You haven't completely answered that question. You represent your constituents in this town. These are important things to them. Response L13. That blows off the engagement comments to that section. L13 was and remains the standard non-answer, but it gets at the fundamental flaw of the DGIS and now the draft FGIS. The document by design fails to take a hard look at the spectrum of alternatives that exist between no changes to our existing Euclidean zoning framework and the complete gutting of that framework, planning board role, and resident input in the 72-acre downtown hamlet by virtue of a form-based code. You're just blowing it off, and that's a section in the EIS on alternatives. And I pointed out last time, and I'll point it out again. The fact that you're not answering that question is why, a big reason why at the very outset, that a lot of people have felt that SEQR has not been complied with, and why this endeavor is facing a lot of resistance. Neither of the two alternatives that you're studying are what the 2017 comprehensive plan calls for. Response H6. The red line blows off the engagement comments to this as well. Response H6 simply did not and does not respond to the predicate comment H6. The predicate comments express concern about the max build-out on the quality of the Chappaqua Central School District, our already crushing tax burden, fire and police department resources, and crime. Still, no meaningful response given, no supporting data, just conclusory, result-oriented statements, and not the hard look that SEQR requires. Same goes for comment H8, which also appears to have been blown off in the red line. Response H9. The red line blows off the engagement comments to response H9. H9 simply didn't, the response simply did not, and it does not respond to the predicate comment H9. These comments express concern about whether the costs associated with the higher density in the 72-acre hamlet study are covered by the expected tax revenues. I mean, that's a big question. That's important to your constituents. And the response is not complete. It's emblematic of just a complete, we'll figure it out. And you basically say the tax revenue increases will be $2.78 million in revenues that you'll generate, but you give no idea of what the cost will be. You serve up the same incomplete analysis again in H11. The same defects are in H12. I mean, it's just, H11 and H12, they're not in the red line changes. Response H10. Again, the red line blows off the engagement comments to response H10. It simply did not, H10 in the initial response did not and does not respond to the predicate comment H10. It was brought up in the engagement session, and the red line is, it just blows it off. Ignored. And what was that about? That predicate comment asked about the increased level of emergency medical professionals, firefighters, and police with added density. Again, no analysis other than to say the development plan, quote, may result in an increased demand for police officers, firefighters, and town DPW staff, which will be addressed by the town on an annual basis, close quote. That's the analysis? That's what we're calling complete? That's not a hard look. Come on. Response H13. The red line blows off the engagement comments to response H13. The original response simply did not, and it still does not, respond to the predicate comment for H13. The predicate comments asked about the impact of the proposed action on our Chappaqua Library. No response given, other than to acknowledge that the library was not included in the downtown working group, wasn't even given basic notice as an interested agency for the proposed action at the outset. Again, this is what you're calling complete? That's the standard blow-off, and the document is laden with this. Response H15. Again, it blows off the engagement comments to response H15. The predicate comments asked about the impact of the proposed action on the headcount necessary to manage the associated oversight in town hall. The standard not answer we're left with, which is basically, maybe we'll let you know. This is an EIS. That's not complete. And I know this is a long exercise with me standing up here and doing this, but there's a reason I'm doing this. I'm trying to get across to you that this is, there's an impact when you walk out of here and say that the document is just complete, and you've got these massive holes. Here's another one. Responses H16, H17, 18, H19, H20, H21, H22, H23, H25, H26. The red line blows off every single one of them. And when I say it blows off, it doesn't appear. What does that long string citation of comments refer to? Relates to the predicate comments and concerns raised in large part by Fire Chief Russell Maitland, and that the fire department input was not obtained by the town board on a laundry list of items too many to count, but illustratively they were things like call type analysis, the impact on the anticipated firehouse expansion, I mean, that's important, apparatus adequacy, additional equipment needs, the ability of the department's ability to use a ladder truck for extinguishment and record. I mean, the list just goes on and on. At a certain point, this just becomes, in my opinion, not doing right by the community. Response H33, again, this one doesn't even attempt to address the engagement comments as to H33. Response H33 is notable in two ways. In attempting to sell us on the notion that dropping nearly 1,000 apartments in the max build-out in our hamlet, and selling us on that won't significantly add to enrollment in the Chappaqua Central School District, the FGEIS admits what many of us have been saying for over a year. It's not yet known what the long-term impact of COVID-19 will be on school enrollment, period. Now, at least with respect to H33, I can kind of understand why you haven't answered it, because COVID-19 and the crisis we're living in is not over. And you can't complete the analysis now, and I think you're aware of that, and there's no getting around that. And the impact on the schools is a major issue with this proposed action. And we're just gonna blow that off? I mean, there was one stunning sentence in the red line with respect to H33. It said, quote, the town development department will coordinate with the CCSD to monitor new development proposed, period, close quote. I mean, you have been telling the CCSD that you're not even giving them a few extra weeks to put their comments into this document, and you're putting out a red line trying to sell us on the fact that you're going to work with them in the future? I think you need to think long and hard about that Responses H35 and H40. The red line blows off the engagement comments to both of these, H35 and H40. I mean, H35 was totally ignored, and H40 was, for all practical purposes, blown off as well. You know, this is that same issue again about the excellent public school district and that being a strong factor in attracting people to Chappaqua in the analysis. And, you know, again, I mean, this is not the area to cut corners. I mean, the responses remain wholly deficient and incomplete. And I understand that that applies to the school board's response as well. And frankly, you know, I call balls and strikes with respect to the school board. As a 16-year resident, I've generally been happy with them. Sometimes they do things that I like. Sometimes they do things I don't like. But generally, I've been happy. But I will tell you this. Since this COVID crisis hit, in my opinion, okay, we owe them a debt of gratitude. And I am not going to allow, I am just not going to allow for people to turn around and say, see, that's the best we got from them. If we're a true community, that's not an answer you give to them. I'm sorry, and I mean that from the heart. That is not an answer you give to them.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean.
What I mean by that is, if the response to the part of the issue in the FGEIS is that there are basically two analyses given, right? One by the town and one from the school district, okay? And the way that I read it, neither considered that factor, right? That's essentially it. And then there was a third analysis done by residents of local factors here, and they did a quite good analysis, right? The response to this essentially is pointing at the two reports, which everybody acknowledges, and even the FGIS acknowledges, did not contemplate a key factor that should have been used, and we're just going to proceed again anyway. That's, to me, I acknowledge that the CCSD and also the consultant did not do an analysis that was complete. It should have considered that. There was one that was done by residents, but we're still not done. And I guess the thing is, I'm not willing to say that the document is complete just because during this period of time, this was the best they could do with all the other constraints they had on them. And that does not mean that I don't understand that this process can't go on forever, Lori. I do get that. And I also and I really do get that. And I also understand that there are legitimate needs downtown for revitalization. I totally get that. But I don't think that that is a place where we should just be like, you know, that's it. No, there was a reason. I think there was a reason why, and I think we got to cut them a little bit more slack. I really do. And I am not somebody who is an apologist for the Board of Education and the CCSD on everything they do. I will tell you, on the overwhelming majority of things, I'm happy, and I will call balls and strikes on them, and they know it.
Mr. Gottlieb, if I just interrupt for a second, I apologize. There's people waiting on the line.
Okay, all right. So let me just finish up here. Okay, I'll just tell you, I've got three more. Basically, and Lori, if you want to talk to me afterwards about this, I'm happy to speak.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I value the work that the school board paid their consultants to do. Their consultants were not running the school during COVID. They were getting paid to do the analysis that the school board paid them to do. And I think it's a useful analysis. I thought that the residents, the analysis provided by residents looking at local multifamily housing, although those units aren't exactly relevant to this action because they are townhouses and not apartments in general, is useful. And that all contributes to, you know, the basis of information that I'll use to, you know, to deliver my input on what the legislation should be. So, you know, I'm kind of missing, you know, so what is missing from that impact of COVID? Is that what you're saying? That's what's missing?
Not
is
just,
impact of
no, it's
COVID?
also that
I'm
both.
not understanding what you're saying is missing.
No, what I'm saying to you is this, that the school board the way that I read the document, the reason why there was a resident-driven study of this was because the one factor that was not really looked at by either the town or the CCSD's consultant was the quality of the schools and how they are really a big draw here, and that actually does really affect the analysis. And I understand, they paid a consultant, I get it. You know, but consultants, as I'm sure most people would recognize, you can't just say, well, I'm paying them and they're gonna come back and get, they do have to be brought up to speed, they do have to be, I don't wanna use the word managed, but they have to be overseen. And I could certainly see that at that point in time, you know, they may not have had, you know, the most bandwidth out of all the different interested, you know, agencies here to really do that. And that's kind of where I'm getting at.
Well, and Warren, it's the towns, it's the onus is on the town to actually do the
Well, right.
review.
Right, I know, but, you know, they have a fiduciary duty too, so, you know, anyway. So
Okay,
anyway,
So, okay, I just wanted to get
Sure.
some clarity on what you were getting at.
Yeah.
And, I think that, we have now an abundance
Okay,
of
okay.
analysis on this topic
Okay.
available to the board for
Okay.
review.
okay, good. And then basically the last four that really weren't responded to were H63, I-19, which was all about alternatives, that didn't happen at all. I-29, which is, had to do with retail vacancies in town, and I-43. And I-59, I-65, and, you know, again, guys, this is nowhere near complete. I just don't see it. Thanks.
Anybody in the audience want to speak before I go to the people online? Carrie, if you can bring someone, whomever's online.
Sure, hold on one second. Sarah Shapiro, I'm going to open your line. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, I apologize if you hear noise. I've got my whole family here with me. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
go ahead.
Okay, great. First, I have to say that I agree with Warren. It feels a little goofy making comments when the board has basically already cast their votes earlier this evening. But regardless, this is what I have to say. As a layperson, I don't really understand how you can possibly decide that an environmental review is complete when there's a possibility that you could go back after you decide on the completeness and then go back and revise the content of the code. One would think that that would trigger an additional environmental review, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't. Additionally, about a week ago tonight, I heard the request from council for the school district, and they asked for a few more weeks to review the FGEIS. I would just like you to give that time to them. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shapiro.
So, you know, so again, on this topic, and council can clarify for me if I misunderstand, right? That this exercise is for the town board members to determine if the document has information, enough information for them to render it complete and make a decision regarding their zoning choices down the road for this board.
Exactly right. And a similar comment was made at the last work session, so I just want to make sure that the board is crystal clear on this. Back in July, we workshopped the proposed form-based code legislation, and the board discussed a couple of changes. One of them was to reduce or to no longer permit 5-story buildings. Other changes involved procedure, so how an application would actually walk through the development process. So those were changes to the code that either didn't have any potential environmental impacts or clearly mitigated them, going from 5 stories to 4 as a max. That type of change is totally permissible during this process. And it was appropriate to do then, the board determined, so that, again, there's an additional opportunity for the public to see the legislation, understand what's being proposed, understand how it's being potentially changed, as opposed to sort of backloading all of that work at the end of the process.
Thank you.
Carrie, is anyone else on, please?
Yes, Zhang Lu, I'm going to open your line. You just need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
That's great. This is Zhenxi Liu of 38 Oak Hill, Chappaqua, New York. I have two very quick comments. The first one is that I want to say thank you, Councilwoman Lisa Katz, and all the members of the community that show up for this type of meeting regularly and ask questions. I'm an immigrant from People's Republic China, which is a country under dictatorship. So I do appreciate the value and actually admire principled opposition. That's the reason Chappaqua is a better place to live. It doesn't matter who's in power. We always need principled opposition today and tomorrow. That's my first comment. The second comment is that is for the town board. I hope the town board will show a bold leadership to unite the community by delaying the vote for FGEIs until after the election. I understand the leaders like to talk about leadership. They talk about bold leadership. When I hear those, I often am quite concerned because they often meant the size of the project. But for this time and this moment, I think it is more important to show bold leadership to unite the whole community. That's the hardest thing to do. And look at the national politics. It is a really disturbing time. This is the kind of bold leadership that we need. And it's not about legal authority of the town board. It's about showing humility when people have power. So those are my quick comments for people in the audience and for people on the stage. So and I hope that people will work together to make Newcastle better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Carrie? Anyone
Yes,
else,
hold on
please?
1 second. Becca Valles, hold on. You just need to unmute yourself.
Hi. Hi, this
Hi.
is Becca Valois. I live at 149 King Street. So much has gone on in the last few years, bringing to light the mistreatment of humans. We look back and recognize where history failed. In the case of the form-based code, no one needs taller buildings, but yet not just one or two, but dozens of families are ill affected by this rezoning. For that reason alone, why is the town board so adamant to get this pushed through? My quality of life is being threatened. Why? Why are my neighbors and I not being considered? And why is it okay to obstruct the view from my living room window and take any ounce of humanity I have in my bathroom and my bedroom? You may not think much of my view, but we knew what we were doing when we purchased this townhouse. And under no circumstance did we ever think we'd be staring at a brick wall or have our privacy taken away completely. The town board has an obligation to this hamlet, and you're not fulfilling it. You are blinded by the fight that fuels you. And in the process, you are forgetting that you're hurting so many people, my family and my neighbors included. We lose everything when you build right behind us. No way can we keep our curtains open when a parking garage or apartment building is directly behind me and higher than my bathroom, bedroom, and living room windows. Yes, one floor makes a difference. We do not want to live in the dark. Do you? Has anyone on the town board thought of how this would feel if it were your homes and your privacy and your quality of life that was being threatened? Why is the town board okay with taking this away from us? We have zoning laws to protect us from this, and you're fighting what protects human beings, taxpayers in this town. In November of 2020, a board member mentioned the research done in the town of Malta's form-based code, that they required a buffer area of trees to protect residential neighborhoods like 149 King. The town board led us to believe for the past year that they would do something similar, and now this idea is lost. No mention of a tree buffer zone is described to us. We feel misled and intentions have been twisted. At a previous meeting, there was a new proposal for no first floor commercial on the east side of North Greeley, when commercial was the whole point of this, correct? How can you gain believers and supporters if you're reaching for ideas and changing them to fit your needs constantly? If you're not going above 3 stories, do not change the zoning. The town board has changed its tune so many times. I have lost confidence in what the town board stands for, and I'm embarrassed to see adults treating other adults this way. Fighting for the sake of fighting is exhausting, and nobody wins. Intelligent people are sharing important facts on how to gain momentum in this hamlet without hurting the residents. Why isn't the town board listening? You could be heroes, and instead, you're victimizing. Higher taxes, crowded classrooms, quality of life lost. No one moved here for that. Nobody wins. I beg you, don't be a part of history that looks back and regrets what you've done to your tax-paying residents and people who chose to live in town. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Jeremy, do you mind if I respond to that?
Yeah,
Because
please go ahead.
I don't know, Becca, if you were able to sign on earlier, and I just want to address this comment because, you know, again, I take full ownership of what I said back in November, and I certainly have been working on that throughout the year. The process that we're in right now is an environmental impact statement. We're not working on the legislation, but I did assure Mr. Levine earlier at this town board meeting that a buffer zone and a neighborhood compatibility clause, something that is replicable from the town of Malta, would definitely be appropriate on the North Greeley zoning change. And to just address how we've, you know, constantly evolved or changed, you know, this, you know, the legislation, it's a process. And, you know, from the very beginning, we heard everyone loud and clear that nobody wanted 5-story buildings. Nobody wanted, whatchamacallit, the whole hamlet, you know, under the form-based code. So we've reduced that footprint, and we're listening to all of you. And, you know, we're in this process of trying to make the best decisions and craft legislation that is positive for this town. And you know, perhaps my words may not mean as much to you. I know you personally. I know your son. They play football together. But I will tell you that we're very committed to making this work for everyone, not just to argue for the sake of arguing. I certainly have, as you know, as a fellow 3rd grade mom and also have a young daughter, I certainly have, you know, converted a lot of time and energy towards this because I think that this community can be a better place for everyone, not just me, not just Jeremy, not just Lisa, not just for the folks out here, for everyone. And I stand by that. Thank you.
I'm sure you do. Okay. Am I still there?
Yeah, you're
Yes,
still
you're
on.
here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you do want the best for everyone, but the best for everyone, and we can do that without going above 3 stories. And not hearing anything for 10 months. I didn't hear your response to Scott. It's that I feel like a lot of things are mentioned and then taken away and then not mentioned for 10 months. And it's frustrating. And I'm stressed. I'm overly stressed.
Becca, I completely understand, but I assure you, it's not because we're being cagey or, you know, deciding things on the whim and all of a sudden I decided, no, we shouldn't do this. It's literally because it's a process. And in the next 2 weeks, or I apologize because I don't know the dates. I don't know the dates offhand, but again, like crafting the legislation, you know, working through it, doing the work sessions, doing the research. I mean, again, like I hate to toot my own horn here, but I've like spent over 100 hours on this, not just on the FGIS, you know, interviewing folks from Sag Harbor to Hampton Bays to Malta to Ithaca to people in Beacon who've, you know, either are in the process or adopted a form-based code. So I just want you to know that I apologize that you know, it seems that we're not responsive. That is in no way intentional or calculated. So at least coming from me. So I just want you to know that because, again, I think it's very important to be straightforward with all of you that these are my goals, and, you know, I just, you know, just need to put that out there.
No, the problem is that your goals hurt us. Your personal goals, everyone's personal goals besides Lisa, is going to hurt every family here. And if you were here and you thought a brick building or garage was going in your back window, you wouldn't like it. And if I moved here specifically for the schools, and as you know, a third grade mom, 23 kids in our classroom is enough. It's a lot. I wouldn't want to see 26 kids in the classroom, nor do I want to pay more taxes. And we're, if everyone doesn't know, we pay fee simple. We pay the same as a house. We don't pay what a condo pays. We're getting screwed. And so, no, I don't feel protected. I feel like you're really blinded by the fight. You guys have drank the Kool-Aid, and that is going to screw us. And that, I'm sorry I'm speaking like that, but that's the case. So the consultants don't know me. The consultants aren't in my living room or my bedroom. Come and see it. Because it sucks. And I'm completely stressed over this. And now it's COVID. Where am I going to go? This size home, this big home that I live in, is $950,000 somewhere in this town. That's not even available. You're meeting your needs, not our needs, not the rest of the town that doesn't agree with higher taxes and bigger classrooms. So yeah, they're your needs. And it's a fight, and it feels like you're fighting. It's great, Lauren, that you've called all those towns and done all that research. We're not them. I'm not them. I'm not in the Hamptons. And I don't want to live in Mamaroneck, nor Scarsdale, nor White Plains, nor New York City. And you guys are causing so much stress, not just for me. It's that I now have to vocalize it and go public, which is like the last thing I want to do. This is the last place I want to be.
Thank you very much, Becca.
So
Yep.
Ed, on this point about the difference between the completion of the environmental impact process, secret process, and the legislation, can you just review for folks the process for the legislation, how it gets drafted, when it becomes available for people to see, and the public comment opportunity on the actual legislation?
Sure. It is available right now in draft form on the town website for folks to look at. It was revised by the board. We workshopped it. The board workshopped it on July 27th. So there are two versions on the town website, and the most recent version reflects those changes I discussed earlier. In terms of schedule and looking ahead, right now under the tentative schedule, we're looking at a work session again on the proposed legislation on October 12th. All right. Again, under the tentative schedule, we would potentially be scheduling a public hearing on the legislation on October 26th. At that point, the legislation will be in a final, or a form on which we can schedule and notice a public hearing and refer the legislation out to the county planning board, to the Newcastle planning board, and you'll open a public hearing on the legislation in November. And at that point, folks can come in and comment on the legislation, things like buffers and setbacks and whatnot. That would be the appropriate time to do that.
And to be clear, and I'm glad you mentioned that, pardon me, I may call you Nick, Ed, that there are setbacks now. There are certain requirements now with buffers and in the current zoning law, but this is not going to change, meaning maybe different types of setbacks and there may be certain types of buffer requirements, but these aren't removed from the code going forward. It's not as if someone by law now will be permitted to build lot line to lot line.
No, and Sabrina can speak to this as well.
And I think that's just an important thing to recognize. So, I actually went to Becca's home probably about a year ago, I don't recall exactly when it was, to look out her back window for her to show me, or maybe it was a neighbor's home, I don't recall, to show me the view. And at that point in time, it was 4 stories on the east side of North Greeley. And one of the things that we've obviously done is lower that, and I can appreciate it. Some people aren't satisfied that's not enough. On one hand, we're challenged for making the changes that some people want. Yes, 3 stories today is not the exact same thing as 3 stories tomorrow, but we're trying to make it so that it is not what you believe is coming, and believing it's coming doesn't mean in fact it is. So we're open. This is the FGIS. This is not the code. We want to make sure the appropriate setbacks are there. We want to make sure that your view out your back window in terms of a 3-story building is not a brick wall right up to it. Yes, 4 stories is the west side of North Greeley, but I think if you sat with us, you would see that there are not I think somebody used the term monstrosities before, that you believe there may be. I understand, though, you are where you are in terms of your location in the hamlet. So we want to listen to, we want to work through the code. We've made many changes, and we're committed to making necessary changes going forward.
And
Right.
just to clarify, the current zoning for the east side, is that at 3 stories? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And I was going to add earlier that that district, it's the BR district, has setbacks, obviously, and the setbacks that exist in that district today aren't all that different. They're essentially the same as the proposed form-based code would set them.
And can I just point out, though, that we don't actually get to the point of crafting or, finalizing any legislation until we've deemed this complete and then pass a finding statement. So I want to urge the town board, and I understand, especially that side of the room, you have done so much work on this and put in hours, and that is completely appreciated by everyone. And our consultants have done a lot of work. We've certainly run into times in this town where our consultants or contractors we've hired have maybe not done the fulsome job we would like them to. And even though I know you've done so much work, but I would urge this town board that we need to get this right, not get it done right now. And if we can't, this document, if you read it and open your ears and your eyes and look, it is not complete to look at, to even consider legislation for North Greeley, much less the whole 72 acres, which is what we're actually talking about right now. So even if we're going to look at that legislation, I think we first need to make sure that we have studied everything we can study, and it is remiss from a fiduciary perspective not to get these questions answered. Because no matter what we may do with any legislation on North Greeley, that can be expanded pretty much instantly to the entire 72-acre hamlet. And I know you're going to say there's a permissive referendum, but that's not, the town board can pass it without a vote of residents and without, frankly, much input from residents. We have to hold one meeting. So that can be done, so we need to get this done right. And I think we need to make sure that every single question is answered. And these residents who spent countless hours going through this document and coming here tonight have actually legitimate questions. They're not just coming up here telling us we're terrible people. They have significant issues on this document and are pointing out holes in this document. So it is so upsetting to me that this town board is not seeing that and not thinking that we actually need to continue looking at this and making sure that this document is complete before we move to looking at the legislation.
All right, thank you, Becca. If we can bring the next, so just let the
Sure.
next people who have not
Mary
spoken.
Ann O'Connor, just unmute yourself, please.
Come on.
Good evening, everyone. I have a question for the board. I guess I've raised this before, and I'd like to hear whether the board is under the impression that where the maps in the legislation dictate that retail is required on the ground floor, whether retail in fact is required on the ground floor.
So the legislation is not written yet. It is in draft. The board, I think, is still discussing the ground floor commercial requirement. I know that different board members have different perspectives on where to have a ground floor requirement and where perhaps to not have a ground floor requirement, i.e. east side of the street, west side of the street. So we're still having that discussion, and the legislation is not in a final draft, so that will all be coming.
Well, I'm not talking about where on the maps you are going to require retail. I'm talking about the code itself. And I guess my takeaway from your response is that you don't understand what the code says in that regard. The code has the carve out where retail is supposed to be required on the ground floor that would allow developers to decide to not have retail on the ground floor. So I had raised a question about the analysis of that. What is the impact to, for example, other existing businesses in the hamlet if you start seeing developers choose to not have retail on the ground floor? And the response ignored what the code says, which tells me that the consultants may not even be aware of what the code says. And so I raised that a couple weeks ago at a work session and was told that you would look into it. So the red line actually does not answer the question again. And the red line says that it is not intended to eliminate retail on the first floor in those areas where it is required. Well, that is not an answer. Whether you intend or not, whether the consultant intends not to eliminate retail, doesn't take away from the fact that your code has this carve out.
So the code is the legislation that will be written that is not yet fully written. So
the draft is stapled to this environmental impact statement, correct? And the draft, you have to analyze what the draft legislation will and will not do. And so you were sitting here earlier saying, this is complete, yet you don't seem to understand what the code says.
I think the board understands what the draft code says. We addressed this at a prior work session. We had discussion about activating uses. We had a discussion about what it meant to require retail on the first floor, and you heard, you got input from Res Group on that point as well. So I think the board is well aware of the issue, and it's one of many decisions the board will have to make with respect to the final form of the legislation.
Right. And this
Okay,
exercise.
so then am I hearing correctly that the answer is you haven't decided whether this proviso stays in or out? Is that the answer?
The answer is that with respect to environmental impacts, the board is well aware of the issues. In terms of where the final legislation lands, that is something that's going to have to wait for the public hearing and the legislation to be finalized.
But then that will be after this environmental impact statement is voted on. And so if you look at what the code currently says, which it has that proviso, you have not answered that question of any, there's no analysis in this response that addresses what happens if you keep the proviso in, right? So a statement of it is not intended to eliminate retail, well, how can you even, it doesn't matter what your intent is, what does the code say? So is this proviso, I guess now I have a question for the experts, in other towns that have form-based codes, is this a standard provision that you see?
Do you mean?
In other instances of form-based codes, they do speak to a required area where retail must exist on the first floor to create a center or a business district.
And do they have a proviso, like the proviso that is in this code, which carves that out completely and eliminates the requirement? Are there other towns that have form-based codes that have this type of proviso?
That eliminate the retail area?
Yeah, that have a proviso like what our code says. The draft code that's in this document has a proviso that eliminates the retail requirement. It doesn't matter what you say on the map. There's a proviso that says you don't have to have it. The developer can decide, I'm going to put a lobby and a gym.
A majority of the proposed form-based code relies on what is called a regulating plan. In that regulating plan, there is a designated retail first floor requirement. Any property that is fronting on that district where you have required retail must provide required retail. In the North Greeley area, the board has been discussing the extent of the required retail area on the east side of the street where they have been discussing the height of the buildings. They have not yet made a determination as to whether or not the required retail area will remain on the east side of the North Greeley area.
I think you're missing the point. Even if the board determines that retail is going to be required on any section of North Greeley, your code has a provision that overrides that requirement.
We're aware of it.
Notwithstanding what it says on the map.
This was discussed at a prior work session. The board's aware of what the code says.
But then you didn't answer the question. There's no response.
So,
In
Ms. O'Connor-
response A in 11, all it says is it is not intended to eliminate retail. What does that even mean? I guess I go back, what other towns have a proviso like this in a form-based code? Where else has this been used and tested? That's a question for the consultant to answer. Where has this type of proviso been? What other towns are we talking about that have this proviso?
Hey, Ed, if the draft form-based code, it gets attached to the findings, to the FGIS, is I think what Marianne's asking.
It's Appendix A of the DGEIS.
Okay, so I guess the question is then, is that binding?
No.
No.
The point is that the board is aware of it. We talked about this at a prior work session. It's a legislative decision that the board will have to make, and you've looked at and talked about the issues.
So even if it's I'm asking just for clarification, so even if it's an appendix, that doesn't mean it's binding? Because it would be workshopped later.
It is the subject of the environmental impact statement. The full build-out analysis that is the theoretical standard which we are looking at impacts against is built out in accordance with the draft form-based code that is included in the DGEIS as Appendix A. There will be changes to that code, and the changes the board has been discussing has in theory been lessening the impact of the code by reducing the height of a building, by limiting the area that you're going to apply initially, is extending the time frame of the build out. All of the analysis in the environmental review is based off of that code and is compliant with that code.
The bottom line is the FGIS is quite separate than the actual zoning code. Even though it's attached as an exhibit, it's not binding, because otherwise the FGIS and the form-based code would be the exact same thing.
That's right.
Correct.
Okay, but that still doesn't answer the question.
So my suggestion, Ms. O'Connor, is maybe email Sabrina and to help provide some clarity, because maybe there's some confusion.
We have the consultant on right now. I guess I'd like to hear, where did this proviso come from? What other towns have used it? And, are they comparable to ours? What other towns that have a form-based code have this major carve-out?
Do you want me to answer that, Sabrina, or give some feedback?
I think if you can answer it, Bonnie.
We were actually talking about that today with Tortigalis, who put together the draft code, and Eric did reply to us when we were talking about this particular point, that the retail is, as you said, set as in a desired core, because that's the core of the Hamlet Center, and that it really is more of a fallback where, you know, if a builder builds a building and it has it's supposed to have retail below, they're not able to lease it right away, perhaps, then they have the opportunity to provide the lobby or the gym or a, you know, whatever, the bike repair area, something that has to do with the building, but it's an activated use where it has windows on the front and it makes an interesting streetscape. And I don't have exact answers or examples, but I know that he's written a lot of codes and he could probably provide some and provide more clarity on why that exists and how it works and where it's worked. We can see if we can get that from him.
I've looked at the Portchester code, you know, and the one in Malta that's been thrown out as a model. They don't have it.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Portchester does, but I will double check that.
If I may add,
Whether they do or don't, I mean, I would
Right.
assume to a certain extent, every ultimate form-based code has some unique characteristics, even though there's some
Exactly.
overarching
Okay, that's
commonalities.
fine,
So
but
whether
then
it fits in one particular municipality may or may not, and maybe there's in another, but there may need to be a hybrid type of a situation of you're picking and choosing from a different one. So
Right, and you're weighing
I
a
don't know
lot
if
of
that's
different factors on a particular stretch that you're talking about lowering the height and,
Right,
you know,
that's
there's lots
fine,
of different
that's
factors.
fine. However, but if it's not been tested anywhere, that should be something for the board to consider. Do we want to be a test case for allowing this? So for example, you have, I mentioned this before, you have Ibiza and you have two storefronts next to it. A developer wrote a public comment that I think they already have plans drawn up. So we would lose Ibiza, which is a great restaurant in the hamlet, right? And we would lose at least the storefront next to it, possibly the one next to that as well. That developer, you know, you mentioned, well, if they can't if they can't find a tenant, that the code doesn't even say that. They could the developer at the outset could choose to design their ground floor to not have retail. So not only would we lose Ibiza and lose the other storefronts, we wouldn't gain anything. And we're too small of a hamlet to start losing retail. Or the Rite Aid building, that's one of the largest buildings in town. When the form-based code was first proposed, there was a lot of discussion. Oh, I'd love to see a wine bar there. Or what kind of restaurant would you want to see there? You have to let residents know they may get nothing because you're leaving it solely up to a developer to decide whether they rent it out at all to anyone and whether they instead choose to have a storage space and a gym or a lobby or whatever.
I don't believe that's accurate, but Sabrina, you can certainly comment on that, and I think we need to move forward, but I don't think that's an accurate
What
description.
part is not accurate?
and
What
I
did
don't-
I say that was not accurate?
the intention of the form-based code was to establish a required retail area. There has been subsequent discussion to the original code about changing the required retail area. What I'm hearing, Ms. O'Connor, is that you have a problem with changing the required retail area, and
You've misunderstood everything I've said, if that's your takeaway. You've misunderstood the code as well, which is frightening.
I think it's not eliminating the retail, if I understand you correctly, not eliminating the required retail. It's eliminating the proviso that allows there to be something other than retail.
Yes.
Correct. That is the discussion that is
Also, like
occurring.
clarification on Mr. Salon, what did I say that was incorrect? You said that
I think Bonnie just provided Bonnie just provided clarity as to what you just said. And if you have a concern about the code, because we're not there yet, by all means share that.
I have a concern about the
By all
response.
means share that. So by all means
I
share
have
that.
a concern about the response.
We want to have that. sorry, go ahead, finish up.
I may or may not have a concern about the code, depending on the response in the FGEIS.
Okay,
And there hasn't been a response to the question of what is the impact if you keep that proviso in, which is what is drafted and what gets stapled to the environmental impact statement. You have not answered the question of what's the analysis if, let's say, every developer decides not to put retail on North Greeley.
So I think it sounds like you're not satisfied with the response to that question, which is what would be the impact of removing a ground floor commercial requirement?
I guess then I turn it to you, Ms. Morton, because you said you were satisfied with all of these responses. So do you find that response adequate? Just merely saying it's not intended, that commercial uses, that it's not intended to eliminate retail? Are you satisfied with the response that's given?
The document gives me information, the information that I need to have an opinion on how I think the legislation should read. So yes.
Well, that is a canned response that shows no thought in reviewing any of these answers, and that is most unfortunate.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor.
Thank you.
Carrie, is anyone else left?
Antonia Clearwaters. Just unmute yourself, please. Antonia Clearwaters. You just need to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
We can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
You're breaking up, Ms. Clearwater. We can't hear you. I'm sorry.
You're in a bad cell phone area or something. Annette, we can't hear you at all. You're in a bad cell phone area.
Okay, I mean, you may lose me.
Yeah. Why don't you put, Carrie, if you can put her on hold momentarily, and just very briefly, if you, Mr. Levine, if you please, very quickly.
Sure, super quickly. On the setback issue that Becca brought up a few minutes ago, the form-based code as drafted does not require any sort of side setback. It's 0 feet on the sides and also 0 feet on the rear. Correct me if I'm mistaken about that.
You're mistaken on one thing. I didn't draft the form-based code, all right? I think you're almost also mistaken on the setbacks. We looked at this, and Sabrina and I both assessed that the setbacks are very similar between what's proposed in the form-based code and what exists right now in the BR district.
Mr. Levine, we'll go and look at, to confirm what he's saying is accurate. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got enough feedback on this point to make sure that we want to clarify this point as we approach the legislation.
So let's give Ms. Clearwater another chance, if hopefully it works. Go ahead if you can hear me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clear right now.
Okay. One of my real questions that I've had all through this process is whether or not you guys are fiduciaries, because the fact is I keep hearing how you've been doing this for multiple years, and this is, 2 years in the making, and you are satisfied with no financial analysis whatsoever. I mean, I don't understand it, and maybe it's because I'm a fiduciary at work Monday through Friday, and maybe it's because I'm a fiduciary on a non-profit board, but the fact is you have no idea what the financial impact is from the fire department, from the police. Like, I cannot understand how intelligent people lack this. If over 2 years you haven't had the time,
Ms. Clearwater, I got the last part.
Haven't had the freaking curiosity to care what the costs are.
You're breaking up again.
You came in and out, but we got the gist of your statement loud and clear. But go ahead, Ms. Clearwater.
I'm extremely frustrated that you can spend 2 years or more, however you want to use the start time, and you have no financial analysis. I mean, it's beyond me how a town board can view this as complete when you don't have any of that information. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be exact, it's going to be perfect. I mean, no financial modeling is, but isn't this done? I mean, we're all these towns that people quote with form-based codes, do they literally not have any idea what the tax impact is? It's just, as a resident, like, I just don't understand how you don't care and how you don't want those answers. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I mean, I'm just going to leave it there because I just don't understand how you can accept something as complete without such basic information and not even, you don't even seem, I never see any concern about what this might do to all the costs. I mean, as Warren pointed out, you talk about $2.7 million of revenue. As my last recollection of that firehouse on Bedford Road was, it was like a $15 million project. You know, it's like, don't you, I mean, I just don't understand. I really don't understand how anyone on a town board who's a fiduciary, I mean, you hopefully understand what a fiduciary is. You put the beneficiary's interest first. You are our representatives. I'm not even getting into the fact that we elect you. It's the fact that you represent our interests, and you don't seem to care what the implications are from a financial perspective, which is everything. I mean, it's the services, it's the schools, it's, you know, who can live here. I mean, all the people that are really worried about having to move from this town, you know, because they have fairly tight budgets. They're retirees. They're not, you know, they can't just make a big bonus and make it work. I mean, people want to stay here, and they may not be able to stay here because the property taxes may go up. I mean, this is not you don't seem to care about that. And I mean, like I said, I'll stop here, but I don't understand how you can vote for this as being complete with none of this information. And the fact that you don't care and lack the curiosity is really what blows my mind.
Thank you, Ms. Clearwater. All right. Carrie, is anyone else on?
No, that's everyone.
All right, so Ed, Sabrina, Jill, we're going to move this matter to Thursday.
Jason, I just got one more name. Jeremy, I'm sorry.
Right, that's the nicest thing someone's called me.
Joanna Coogan, please unmute yourself.
Hi, I don't have to have my picture up. Oh, well.
We can hear you, go ahead.
It's a good picture.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's not how I'm looking right now after having put my toddler to bed. But
we don't believe you.
So basically, I share a lot of my neighbors' concerns about this document. I'm not a lawyer. I tried getting through this. I, in particular, just went to where my comments were. My husband and I both feel very strongly that this is not the right legislation for our town, and we tried to voice our concerns in a way that we could ask questions that would be addressed by the consultants that we as residents paid a lot of money to. And I feel like with each of my concerns, which I took very seriously, they dismissed them, or it was like offhanded remarks, or not, they weren't offhanded, they were incomplete remarks, especially like when I was talking about the impact on local merchants. In response M3, they're saying, well, it shouldn't be that bad. The potential change shouldn't be that bad, and there's 25 empty storefronts now, and so this should only help. But again, where's the study that shows me that? I knew that from the draft EIS. That's what they said the first time. They didn't do anything to further prove their point. And what's upsetting to me as a resident is that, one, I paid for this analysis, and two, we have to live with these impacts. I have a 3-year-old. I'm going to be here the next 15 to 18 years of my life. I want to know what this means for my town. And I would just urge all of you, please ask the consultants to do what they need to do to answer these questions more specifically. This is not complete. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's everyone.
Please be very quick.
I know that you're going to schedule the meeting for Thursday. Thursday, I don't have kids at Bell anymore, but that I am given to understand that that is Bell's open house night.
And Seven Bridges also.
Yeah, I don't. Okay, I just think, maybe not the best night to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I would add that, as we mentioned before, we certainly keep things open to the public. We've had these sessions and others, starting August 10th. I want to say roughly a half a dozen of these. And I know you haven't agreed on everything or a lot of things, Warren, but one of the things you have suggested is to go above and beyond, and what that means can be subjected to different people, but we're having these for a reason, and there's been amendments and changes reflecting that we have been listening, even if we don't come to 100% meeting of the minds. So I have no objection to that date, and I actually asked, just for my own edification, to find out how many people have been watching these in real time, how many people have been engaged in real time, because fortunately they can watch them later, and a lot of people do. And this is pretty consistent, give or take, with the amount of people who come in person. And when I found out, when I asked about how many people watching them real time, involved real time, which is an important issue because you want that active engagement as it's happening. On the 30th of July, 18 people on Zoom, 29 on August 10th, 25 on August 30th, 25 on September 14th, 42 on the 22nd. I don't know how many there are today. And I share that with you, not because we don't want anyone to have the opportunity, but we've had these sessions for that reason, to allow people to be involved. But more times than not, it appears there's a lot more involvement watching the videos than there are people here. So, listen, I'm not making them up. I asked. Well, I don't know if that's the case, because we've made many efforts. We send out messages on emails, on Facebook. So that all being said, those are the numbers. We want to have people engaged. They certainly can remain engaged, and we're going above and beyond. But I understand your point, but thank you very much. So Ed and Jill and Sabrina, Thursday, do we have to, we're doing this for 6 o'clock on Thursday? Again, I don't recall our time. No, it was later. I apologize. That's right. We're much later.
Right, so, we're actually later. Do you have?
I thought it was
the
8, actually. Now that
agenda?
I think it was 8 o'clock for some reason.
7 is executive session, but actually 7:30? Yeah, 7:30 is work session. And then 8 o'clock will be when our start. And the,
8 o'clock will be, I'm sorry?
our start of our town board meeting.
Okay.
Why are we doing it so late?
Well, I think.
Because people, we
I
have
mean,
some
was-
conflicts and schedules,
Yeah.
so we're trying to just get everybody here.
All right. So I think we're all set. Thank you very much.
So we have some administrative items in our work session. Are you ready? We have our payment of claims.
Good night.
Oh, good night, Sabrina.
Good night,
Safe
Sabrina.
home.
Thank you.
We have authorization to purchase equipment and installation services for the Millwood Water Treatment Plant. This is for their phone upgrade. Authorization to award contract services for professional engineering services for Newcastle Stanwood Water District. We discussed this in executive session. That would be to Hazen and Sawyer. Authorization to award the contract for the fuel tank replacements at DPW. So we've got 3 fuel oil tanks that need to be replaced. They would be replaced with double hull tanks to prevent leakages. Authorization to accept a Hazen amendment and final invoice for the W36 project at the Inningwood Pump Station. A resolution authorizing acceptance of the maintenance bond for the lighting improvement project at Millwood Park. This is for Shock Electric. Resolution for the authorization to accept the tree replacement and mitigation plantings. This is for 16 Little Pine Road. And an authorization to approve the 1-year contract extension. This would be retroactive for NCCMC for the beginning of this year. And an authorization to close a capital project, the 2018 electric vehicle purchase. And that concludes our work session, and if the board's
So let's
ready. we
make a
can go-
motion to adjourn the work session and commence the board meeting, please.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Can I amend that to take a bathroom break
We're
in
almost,
between?
I think we'll have to do is make these just approve these items, correct?
It's just the resolutions.
Yeah. I did
Oh,
want
unless you just
Gonna
maybe public comment.
read the
Good. Take a 5-minute break.
All right, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
5 minutes, go, 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 go,
Okay,
go, go, go.
5-minute
5
bathroom
minute,
break.
5 minute.
Okay.
Run, run. Thank you, Carrie.
All set.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we had opened up the town board meeting. I'm assuming you have no announcements, or maybe am I wrong?
Nope.
All right, I certainly am holding my report, and I assume you are as well.
Yes.
Any public comment? Anyone hands up in the virtual world? Carrie?
Nobody's there.
All right, thank you very much. Nobody's here, and very briefly, I know Lori wanted to share something. So go
Yeah,
ahead,
I
Lori.
did. I wanted to congratulate Newcastle on our bronze certification for climate smart communities. Super exciting. I'm sure people will see.
Hold your applause until she's done speaking.
Yeah. But, so in particular, I want to thank our Climate Smart Community Task Force for the work in assembling the portfolio and description of the action items that qualify Newcastle for this bronze certification. In particular, Jennifer Meadows-Flagg, the chair of the Climate Smart Community Task Force, Sabrina and Kellen Cantrell, who put a lot of work into this documentation. The other members of that committee, Victoria Alzapieti, Bart Carey, Alicia Malloy, Owen Platt, Tracy Stein, Kent Thomas, and Zachary Walk, for their thorough documentation of Newcastle's climate smart policies and actions over the years. And I know that they're continuing to work on this endeavor as Newcastle now moves beyond bronze, hoping to qualify for silver. This program is particularly exciting for Newcastle. Newcastle was the first to make the Climate Smart Pledge in the state of New York. So to now be one of the 72 bronze certified communities in the state is really wonderful. And this program qualifies, or through this program, Newcastle qualifies for 50-50 grants for both the implementation of climate smart policies as well as the work required to get the certifications. So it is a program that pays us back in lots of different ways. So congratulations to everyone who put that work in.
And thank them as well. If you recall back, and I think it was 16, Jill, if I'm not mistaken, and was it 16 when we received $100,000 based on, we were the first in the
Yeah.
in the state over 50,000, under 50,000 population to be honored. But yes, it is a testament to their efforts, so thank you. All right, let's move along. Consent agenda?
Yep.
Anyone? Bueller?
All right. I move to adopt the consent agenda as submitted, consisting of authorization to promote DPW, authorization to purchase equipment and installation services for the MWTP phone system upgrade, authorization to award contract for DPW 2021-09 fuel tank replacement project at DPW facility, resolution authorizing acceptance of a maintenance bond for the lighting improvement project at Millwood, resolution authorizing acceptance of a tree replacement and mitigation plantings maintenance cash bond agreement for 16 Little Pine Road, authorization to approve 1-year contract extension, Newcastle Community Media Center. Thank you, Carrie. Authorization to close capital project 2018 electric vehicle purchase.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $760,674 listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detail voucher detail report, both dated September 24th, 2021. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, September 29th, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Lori?
I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the town of Newcastle is honored to join citizens throughout the country in recognizing September 15th, 2021 as the start of National Hispanic Heritage Month. And whereas many Hispanic Americans trace their roots to the cultures of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, including the Arawaks of Puerto Rico, the Aztecs of Mexico, the Incas of South America, the Maya of Central America, and the Tianos of Cuba and Puerto Rico. Some trace their roots to Spanish explorers. Other Latinos trace their roots to the Africans who were brought as slaves to the New World. And whereas Hispanic and Latino are often used interchangeably, though they are distinct terms, Hispanic refers to people who speak Spanish or are descended from Spanish-speaking populations, while Latino, or the more gender-neutral term Latinx, refer to people who are from or descended from people from Latin America. Neither term captures the diversity of origins or richness of individual histories of the many cultures and regions included. And whereas Every year since 1968, our country has marked an annual celebration of Hispanic culture, and contributions to our community and nation is now celebrated from September 15th to October 15th. And whereas September 15th marks the start of Hispanic Heritage Month as the anniversary of independence for Latin American countries Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, the month includes the Mexico and Chile celebrations of their Independence Days on September 16th and September 18th, respectively. The month-long recognition also includes Columbus Day, or Dia de la Raza, on October 12th. And whereas historically many Hispanic Americans have faced enormous challenges, including access to health and education, economic disparity, discrimination socially and in the workplace, and much more, during COVID-19, these gaps become wider as the community was disproportionately affected by the impact of the pandemic. And whereas Hispanic contributions are essential and have been consistent throughout the history of America. After Native Americans, Hispanic Americans are the second oldest ethnic group in the United States, active in contributing to the country's growth and development since the 16th century in law, science, education, finance, innovation, visual arts, music, literature, and more. Hispanic Americans are job creators and entrepreneurs. And whereas this Hispanic Heritage Month, the town of Newcastle celebrates the contributions, cultures, values, and friendship of our Hispanic and Latinx community members, and reaffirms its commitment to making sure they are seen, heard, and valued throughout the year. Now therefore be it resolved that the town of Newcastle proclaims September 15th, 2021 as the beginning of National Hispanic Heritage Month.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And thank you for being diligent about that. It's an important resolution. I think that's it, if I'm not mistaken.
No, it's
No.
one more.
There's more.
What do I have? What am I missing?
You go.
I move to authorize awarding the contract for professional consulting engineering services for the Newcastle Stanwood Water District preliminary engineering report to Hazen at an amount not to exceed $92,773.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Whereas the town of Newcastle retained Hazen and Sawyer for design services and construction-related services for the installation and startup of 2 new variable frequency drives and 1 new emergency standby generator and automatic transfer switch for the Inningwood Pump Station, commonly referred to as Contract W-36. And whereas D&M Electric was awarded the contract to perform the work and additional construction management services were required of Hazen during the performance of D&M's work. Whereas the Commissioner of Public Works, both current and the predecessor commissioner, oversaw the work performed by Hazen, have an opportunity to review the invoices received from Hazen as well as the requested contract amendment and find same to be appropriate in terms of scope and cost, and recommend the town board amend the contract for Hazen for the performance of the oversight work for contract W-36 as the final invoice from Hazen in the amount of $103,453.32 be approved and paid out of capital project H.8310.5033.8053.2012, originally funded by the Town Water Fund and contribution from the Village of Pleasantville. Now therefore be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Newcastle hereby amends the town's contract with Hazen and Sawyer for design and construction services for contract W-36, all is detailed in their final invoice for project 9117-000 in the amount of $103,453.32, and the contract be amended to reflect these additional services and authorization to pay the invoice.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. I move to adjourn?
That's it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.